Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. Welcome to today's edition of The Law and You. I'm your host, Attorney Shellon Washington. On this program, it's for educational purposes only, and here I teach you various methods of how to be successful in your legal cases. Today, we're going to be talking again about divorces, because divorces is one of my favorite topic to talk about because it causes so much stress for a lot of people. So I like to tell people things that I know that will actually help them to get a successful divorce or even to avoid it altogether by putting the right system in place or doing the right things up front so that if you should ever get to that point in life, you know how to navigate. Of course, most people, when they get involved in a marriage, it's with the hope that they're never going to divorce. But unfortunately, this is life. And this is our reality where a lot of times people get married and then it turns out that it's not going the way they had planned initially. So we have to talk about these uncomfortable things. And the faster you learn, it's the better for you. Good afternoon. Good afternoon to those of you joining. Good afternoon, Ms. Braffett. I see you there. Good afternoon, everyone joining this program this afternoon. So today we're going to speak about domestic relations law, section 236, relating to maintenance. I know maintenance is a big issue. It's a big topic that it's often one of the biggest issue in a divorce because once you get to the divorce, a lot of people don't like to be divorced. Good afternoon. Good afternoon, those of you joining me. Good afternoon, Ms. Durant. I see you. So a lot of people don't like to talk about maintenance because if they're on the side where they're giving their money to somebody, that's a big problem, of course. And most people don't want to deal with that. Most men, in particular, don't want to deal with having to take care of a woman for God knows how long. Now, in the state of New York, what happens is there is statute that determines who and how much money is given to your spouse if you happen to get involved in a divorce. Now, the biggest part you need to know is that the divorce itself, the maintenance in the divorce itself, it could be for a specific duration or it could be without any specific duration attached to it. So you want to make sure that if you're a man and you're going to be divorcing your wife, you need to consider this part first. You need to think about it. You need to analyze it. You need to put things in place first. And then if you're a woman, then I'm guessing if you're not working and your husband is the biggest income earner, you want to make sure that you get what you're entitled to. Now, in the sense of a man, I always tell men, if you want a divorce, make sure you put your life in order at least 2 years before you go file that divorce. If you're the money spouse, what is considered the money spouse is the spouse that earns the most income. In some cases, I've seen right here in America, because we're of the oppression or of the opinion that mostly in Guyana, the wife stays home, or in the Caribbean, the wife stays home and the husband goes and work. But it happens right here, guys, right here. There are a lot of people want their wife or their, in some cases, husband. There are cases where the husband, they just bring him up from Guyana or from some other country and he can't work. So they put him to stay at home and he takes care of the children, and then the wife goes out and work. And if you're that wife, then the table could turn and you will be considered the money spouse, because whichever spouse decides to stay home, that spouse is the non-money spouse, and that spouse would be entitled to maintenance in the event of a divorce. Now, guys, it's better to always take your life out of the hands of the court. There are some judges who are prejudiced, they're biased, they have their own things going on. And you already know where there's people involved, there's situations going to arise where you're not going to be able to get exactly what you want, because that judge sitting on that bench might be somebody that is prejudiced towards men or towards women. And as some of you know, anybody here watching and probably divorced in Kings County or even New York County, there are some judges right there sitting on those benches in Kings County that you got to be careful with, because they have their own thing going on in their head. And there's no way that you could find a system that is without prejudices. Everyone has their own type of biases and prejudices that you need to be careful about. So the best thing always is to try to keep your business and deal with it on your own. If you can't deal with it, if you and your spouse cannot resolve your differences amicably, then you seek out the assistance of the court, because you can always file for a divorce with you and your spouse agreeing on all of the terms and conditions. That way you'll make my job easier and your own life easier. You'll take half of the stress if you have a spouse that you want to divorce and the spouse is agreeable. If that's an agreeable party, then you guys should sit down, definitely have a conversation. Decide what is it you each want from the divorce. Decide if you have assets that you want to split. Decide if your spouse is in need of maintenance. And I've said it many times here before. If you have a spouse in a foreign country and you decide to bring that person here, and then after they get here, you realize, well, I want a divorce because we can't agree. We're not able to live under the same roof. Then it's your responsibility, if you don't ensure, first of all, that spouse get a job, then think about divorce. You will be responsible for that person on the two separate issues of the law. The first one is immigration issue, because remember, when you file that affidavit of support for that spouse to bring that spouse to this country, you told the U.S. government that you will be responsible financially for that spouse as long as for a specific period of time. So you're responsible. So under that theory alone, under immigration laws, you are responsible. And a lot of people don't think about the immigration implications of bringing your spouse, your not working spouse, to the United States and have that spouse sit at home, not working. And one of the first things you should always do, any spouse you bring from a foreign country, is seek to send them back to school, get them qualified, and then they can eventually go into the job market, seek a job, and start becoming independent of you. If you keep that spouse at home and you continue to be the sole provider, and you're like, okay, I want to provide for you, I want to be the money spouse, I want to take care of my household, I don't want my wife to work. Or even in the case of a woman, some women are working for a lot of money, and a lot of women are like, okay, you're going to stay home and take care of the children, and I'm going to be the one going out in the job market and working. And you have to be watchful for that, because you're liable under two separate laws. You're liable under immigration laws because you signed the affidavit of support. And secondly, you're liable under the laws in the state of New York, which require you to take care of that spouse if at the time you were in the marriage, you were the only money spouse and your other spouse was not working. The good part of all of this is there's a duration if your marriage is very short. So for instance, let's say you bring the spouse in 2019 to the United States, and then in 2021, you decide you want to divorce. Then that's a very, very short duration. That marriage is very short-lived. So if you want a divorce like that, there's going to be minimal damage to you, whoever, whether it's the man or the woman, and the spouse was not working, your damage is minimal because the duration of the marriage, not very long. So the court cannot order you to pay a whole lot in terms of spousal support. The problem is when the marriage is very, very lengthy. So for instance, if somebody was married in 1994 and then this is 2024, that's like 30 years span. And then you decide, okay, I want to divorce because I'm disagreeable with my husband or my wife. That is a very bad situation to be in if you have a 30-year-old, 20-year-old marriage, 50-years-old marriage, and you decide at that point, okay, I want to get out of this. I've been in this nonsense for too long. I've been disrespectful. I want to go my own way. You're in a bad situation if your spouse has never worked, because then the law is going to tell you, the spouse who's earning the money, that you're going to be responsible for either a limited duration or an unlimited duration of time to take care of your spouse. The bad thing in all of that, if you have an unlimited maintenance order against you, it means you will be bound to continue to support that spouse for many, many, many years. The only time it changes is when your circumstances changes. So there's times in life when people lose their job, they're no longer working, they're retired. Obviously, if you're going to retirement, you can't afford to continue to support a spouse with, let's say, $1,000 a month or whatever the amount that is calculated against your salary. So you can't afford that no more. So after a certain time, if your circumstances change, you retire. Let's say you retire. and you're like, I cannot keep giving this person $1,000 a month because I am on social security now and a pension. This is now considered a fixed income. If you're now on a fixed income, the easy way to get this done now is to go back to the court that granted the order in the first place. If the judge is still alive, if the judge is no longer alive, the case is going to go before a different judge. Let's say a judge that you were before is already retired or dead, whichever one. You're going to now go before a different judge, and you're going to tell the judge you would like to modify the original maintenance order because there was a change in your circumstances, meaning you're retired now. You can't keep working forever, and you're forced now to go on a fixed income, which is way less than what you were earning at the time you were employed. Now, that you have to get an attorney to do, or you could attempt to do it pro se by going and file what is called an order to show cause. And this is really important, guys. Once a divorce case is closed, once it's closed, the only way you could go back and reopen it to ask for, or not reopen, but to try to get the case modified, the support order modified, you got two methods. You could go to the family court and file a petition in the family court to modify the support order, or you can go back to the same Supreme Court on an order to show cause. On the order to show cause, you'll be telling the court you're now retired, your income has changed, you find all of your supporting documents as to why you think the court should modify an order that was granted against you how many years ago. But obvious reason is because you have a change in circumstances. Another reason could be if you're still on your job, but then you became disabled. So now you're not able to work for the money that you were working for before. So now you become disabled, and you could tell the court like you have become disabled because of a medical condition, medical reason. And then the court is going to seek to modify that order to assist you in either the court could do two things. The court could either not vacate, but terminate the order completely, or the court could choose to just modify based on what you're asking the court to do. Modification is only if you still have the income and you could still support the spouse. But if now you like, we know what the cost of living is right now. So let's say you retire or you become disabled and your check is about $3,000 a month now, and you have to give your spouse an entire $1,000. We know that you will not be able to sustain that because of the cost of living. And chances are your spouse is getting Social Security or something. Every spouse, when you're going to think about divorcing, what the husband should always do is make sure that the other spouse is either seeking work, or if the spouse is not seeking work, before you even divorce, first of all, what you should do is encourage your spouse, like, hey, go get a degree. Hey, go see if you could get a job. Because one of the biggest mistakes I see people making is they get children. And because they don't want both parents to be out of the house at any given time, they want one parent must always be home to take care of the children. They end up telling the wife, like, hey, you stay home and I will go there and I will work. And that's one of the biggest mistakes you could make in America. If you want to do that, I would say go back to your Caribbean country and do that. But if you do it here, you'll be heading to a road of trouble later on if the marriage doesn't work out. If the marriage works out, fine. You don't have to worry about maintenance. You don't have to worry about what are the possibilities of you having to support your spouse for the rest of your spouse's life or for an unlimited period of time. You don't have to worry about any of that. You only worry about that if the marriage is not working. If you brought your spouse from a foreign country, you put your spouse in the house and you say, hey, you don't work, you stay home, I will go and work. And then things start happening to break the marriage down, pull it apart, and now there's trouble in paradise. Now you have to go file a divorce. Always make sure before you even think about divorce that your spouse is either minimally able to take care of themselves. They don't have to be able to work for exact amount of money like you're working for, but at least make sure. There's cases that I've seen where the wife was working for about $21,000 a year, and the husband, he was working for like 70 something thousand dollars a year. Now the court considered that a disparity. You understand? So now to keep the wife at the same status quo that she was in during the marriage, because that's what the court measures these things at, based on the status quo. And if you used to putting your wife in a house where the mortgage is $10,000 a month, and you buy food every month, and you spend on food, you spend on travel, you spend on her maintenance, getting her hair done, her nails done, her facial done, and you're used to spending on all these things, another $10,000 in expenses on your home, plus $10,000 worth in mortgage or rent, whatever it is. Then when you're divorcing, the court is going to tell you you have to maintain that same status quo. Now, if you're forced to maintain a status quo that high, it means that when you eventually separate and she is gone to a different house, or you're gone to a different apartment or home, whatever it is, you're going to have to keep supporting her to maintain that same status quo. But what helps is assets. So if she gets assets from your 401k, from your deferred compensation, from your pension, or there's a marital residence that you guys sell and there's significant amount of money coming out of that, all of that goes towards assets to show that she could become self-supporting. So the amount of maintenance now that you're going to have to give her is just going to be to the extent that she's not able to be self-supporting. The marker or the standard is whether or not your spouse is capable of becoming self-supporting. If you choose to go marry a woman from somewhere in, I don't know, some part of Ghana where they don't go to school, they'll say to drop out to school by the time you get to third form, right? And you bring her here and she could barely read and write, and she can't go back to school. She can't do anything. Then the court is going to tell you that you're responsible to take care of her. Because if she cannot become self-supporting, either by reason of being some sort of mental incapacity or some sort of disability, and you could have learning disability. There's a lot of people with learning disabilities, which makes them incapable of ever being able to work. So you got to really sit and think about the cost you're going to pay for going and marry somebody who is basically uneducated, basically can't educate themselves, basically can't read and write, can't function as a normal person, can't become self-supporting. And like I said, that's the marker, the ability to become self-supporting. And a lot of people lack that ability, coming from a lot of, developing countries, a lot of the Caribbean countries, because education in certain parts is not a priority. And unfortunately, I see a lot of people like people that they can control. So they take people that they know is not going to give them a problem. They're going to be subservient, and they're going to follow their orders. So that's kind of like the price you pay for taking somebody that is subservient, that they're going to just follow your orders and do whatever you tell them. You pay the price. Now you are going to be responsible for that person as long as that person remain in this country. You're going to be able to support them financially. And sometimes, like I said, the court is going to give a duration, unlimited duration. There's not going to be any limit to the spousal support you're going to be required if you take somebody that is have some sort of disability and not ever going to be able to work and support themselves. In a normal person who can become self-supporting, they're going to be required, especially in the family court, to produce a ledger, a diary, showing that they've been applying for work, they've been trying to become self-supporting. But if in the case of somebody who has disability, which I know a lot of the Guyanese men listening to me, they know what I'm talking about. You take a woman somewhere from the interior that will never be able to become self-supporting. You bring her here, and that's your responsibility for the rest of the person's life, or the rest of your life. You'll be supporting them up until, like I said, the orders could always be terminated. It could always be terminated if there's a change in circumstances. And we often see changes occurring during people's lifetime. Like, things are not going to be the same always. Sometimes people get in an accident on the job, or sometimes they just become sick, and that is going to lead to the basis on which you're going to go and tell the court, like, hey, I would like to modify this maintenance order because I can't continue to support this person. And again, even when you go for determination, the standards that the court use is whether or not you have the means or you're capable to continue to support. or if your spouse has become self-supporting at some point. Most likely, if your spouse has a disability, never going to happen. They're never going to become self-supporting, never going to be able to take care of themselves. So you're going to have to hope for a miracle. So to protect yourself from getting to that position, I would say always make sure that if you're bringing somebody from somewhere in Ghana, and as you people know, to get certified in this country, you don't necessarily have to be literate. You just have to be able to memorize things. A lot of the tests that you take over here is multiple choice, which means somebody could actually read it for you. You must be able to look and identify stuff and, you know, and go and take a test and pass it. I see a lot of people come from Ghana. They are not very much literate and they do a CNA, a nurse's aid, or a home health aid course, and then they're able to work and take care of themselves. Somebody's asked me the question. I see Calvin is asking, what if she gets a job and she makes more money than you? Well, of course, we did talk about if the woman is making more money than the man. So that would be a good thing for the man if his wife is working for more money. And then you decide that you want to divorce. That's in your favor because it means you wouldn't even have to worry about spousal support. It's not going to become a discussion, except if the man is like, hey, I'm the non-money spouse. I want to have some of that money, but there's a caveat to that. So I must caution you about men seeking out maintenance from the woman. Lots of times people don't recognize this is what happens in a home. The man tend to give his money towards the home, right? Most of the times women like to be supported. So it turns out where both parties are working. I know this more in particular for Guyanese men. Caribbean men are like this. They like to take care of their household, right? So a lot of the times you'll find the husband is giving most of his money to support the household, but the wife, not so. She might be saving her money and not putting a lot of it into the home. And I know this does not go for Haitian communities because they have a different type of arrangements that they have. So I know I could tell you this about Guyanese men because they are the ones who like to support their household. So if you are the man who always take your minimum wage, your wages that was less than your wife, and pour it into the household, and then you guys are getting divorced, and you recognize that, wait a minute, she's working for more money now than I am because she just went to college, she got a nursing degree or something, and now her income is double or triple mine. I want to have spousal support. The law is going to tell you not so quickly, because there's an analysis that has to be done to determine whether or not you're entitled to support from her. Because remember what I said earlier is about maintaining the status quo, right? So if the status quo was maintained by you putting all of your money and she put a minimal amount of money into the household, then there's no status quo on her part to maintain because it was you who were putting the money the entire time into the household. But if, on the other hand, she gets a job after you got married and it took, like, say 10 years into it and 2 years just before you divorced, she became self-supporting. She got a job. She's working as a nurse. She's earning over $100,000 a year. Meanwhile, you're stuck at $40,000 and you were the one who put her through nursing school, maintained her the whole time. Because she got the job at such a latter time in the relationship, right? Again, there's not much of a status quo to maintain. You'll be entitled to her pension, to her 401k, to her retirement accounts. Yes, you'll be entitled to that. But, and if she has any money saved in the bank account, yes, absolutely, you will be entitled to part of that money that she has saved in that bank account. But outside of that, do not look for spousal support because, again, it's going to go back to how the parties commingle their funds, pool their resources during the marital relationship. Because a lot of time that's not the way it's done. People do not pool their resources. I have a case where, believe it or not, the parties had a income-bearing property, right? So the property was paying the mortgage, right? And then the utilities were being jointly paid, whose name it was in, right? Both parties paying the utilities. The wife, unfortunately, was the one who taking care of the child buying food for the house, while the husband, he did virtually nothing because the mortgage money, the money from the tenants, was adequately able to take care of most of the expenses. So he did virtually nothing. In that case, you really can't expect to ask for maintenance because there was never any issue where the parties were pooling their resources. Okay. But the good part is because they were in a marriage, his money in his account that he was saving to the exclusion of the wife belonged to her, and vice versa. Whatever money she had that she was saving belonged to them both. You understand? So the money was considered, there was a presumption that it was marital asset. That's where the court always starts, based on a presumption. Remember, guys, presumption could be overcome by evidence. If you have evidence to the contrary, for instance, let's say you're divorcing, you have $100,000 in the bank, but that $100,000 was given to you by a dead relative as an inheritance, right? Even if you produce those bank accounts during discovery, during your divorce, guess what? It's your money because it's an inheritance and your spouse is not entitled to it. That's why it's called a presumption of marital assets, because you could produce evidence to show, like, hey, this money is an inheritance, therefore she's not entitled or he's not entitled to any of it. Even with your property, if it's a pre-acquired property and you never commingled your funds, you never took money that you worked for during the marriage and put it into the house was always paying its own rent. You had tenants in there paying the rent, and the rent was used to pay the mortgage and the taxes and to upkeep the property. Then there's no issue there about that house being marital asset. And then when your wife or your husband try to say, well, it's marital asset, all you have to do to overcome the presumption that it's marital asset is pull your evidence. Bring the bank statements showing that you deposit all the tenants' rent, and that money, that rent money that was deposited into the bank account, was the same money that was used to pay the mortgage, the taxes, and upkeep the property. And you never ever took a cent from the money that you was working for during the marriage and put it towards anything whatsoever to do with that house. Because that's the only way you can maintain those assets, those pre-acquired assets, separate and distinct from any type of assets you acquire during the marriage. Okay. So, I mean, that's one of the ways where you could keep that separate and not have it to be any part or overcome the presumption of marital assets. You just show, like, hey, I never used my salary. I never used money that we gained during the marriage to put on that property. That property is separate and distinct. A lot of times people commingle marital assets with pre-acquired assets, and that's how it lose its separate identity. And a lot of people get they get finesse into, if they get the wrong attorney to represent them, they get finessed or confused into giving up their rights to assets that they shouldn't otherwise be giving up their rights to. Any asset that you didn't put anything into, while you were married, that asset is separate. There's cases where people had assets in the 1990s, they get married in the 2000s, and then when they get married, the spouse want their portion of the asset, but the portion is only what is marital. So from the date you got married to the date you filed for a divorce, that's the cutoff date for any marital asset. From the date you got married to the date you filed for divorce, not the date the divorce was granted, but to the date you filed for your divorce action. That is good for pension, 401k, deferred compensation, any type of retirement assets, even real estate. So if you choose that, okay, after you file for the divorce, you win a settlement. And by the way, you should know also, settlements are not subject to marital distribution. So if you've suffered some sort of injury and your spouse wasn't a party to the lawsuit for loss of consortium or something of the nature, then your spouse is not entitled. If you got $1 million, $2 million, your spouse is not entitled to that money. You could literally just take all that money and go. And I'm not telling you guys to do that, because that would be a terrible thing to do. You win a big settlement and then you file for a divorce. And you say, okay, goodbye, I'm leaving at this point. That would be a terrible thing to do. But the fact of the matter is that money will not be considered marital, but it will be separate assets. Anything you acquired as inheritance or from personal injury settlement, from disability, those things are not marital assets. All right. Anyway, guys, I hope this was insightful for you, and I hope you were able to get some sort of information to help you later on if you do decide to divorce your spouse or whatever, and you put these things into practice. Thank you so much for staying with me here today on 107.107 FM. Thank you so much for being my guest here this afternoon and listening. And for those of you who shared the link, and I hope this information that you received today would be helpful if you ever have to go through a divorce. Thank you so much, guys. And I will see you next Saturday again. Same place, same time. So this is attorney Shellon Washington, owner and founder of the Washington Law Firm, located at 455 Utica Avenue in Brooklyn, New York. We're specialized in medical malpractice, personal injuries, matrimonial law, and landlord and tenant. If you're in need of legal representation, please give us a call today. The number to call is 718-877-3100. Consultation is free at no cost to you. So call us today to see if we can be of any assistance to your legal needs. Again, the phone number to call us is 718-877-3100.